I was replacing a leaky pipe under our bathroom sink on a completely ordinary Saturday afternoon when my hand brushed against something that wasn't supposed to be there. A small, flat object taped to the underside of the cabinet, wrapped carefully enough that it clearly hadn't gotten there by accident. It was a phone, not my wife's phone. A second one, fully charged, password protected, with a lock screen photo I didn't recognize. That same night, when I asked her about it, my wife cried, held my hands, and said the words I think most people in that situation say. I would never do that to you. I wanted so badly to believe her. What I found over the following 2 weeks made that almost impossible. My name's Nathan. My wife, Rachel, and I had been married for 17 years. 2 kids, a mortgage we'd almost finished paying off. The kind of long, steady marriage that I genuinely believed had settled into something comfortable rather than something concerning. I'm a contractor by trade, which is the only reason I was under that sink in the first place. A slow drip I'd been meaning to fix for weeks finally annoyed me enough on a free Saturday to actually deal with it. Rachel was out running errands with our younger daughter. I had the house to myself, a wrench in one hand, and absolutely no reason to expect the afternoon to go anywhere except toward a fixed pipe. The phone was taped high on the inside back wall of the cabinet, behind the extra towels we kept stored there. In a spot you'd genuinely only find if you were actually working underneath the sink with a flashlight. The way I was. It was a basic prepaid model, screen dark, but clearly charged based on the small battery indicator that flickered on when I picked it up. I sat on our bathroom floor for a long time before I even tried to turn it on properly. The phone was locked with a numeric passcode I obviously didn't have. I couldn't get into messages, call logs, anything substantive. What I could see, without unlocking it, was the lock screen photo itself. A candid picture of Rachel and me from what looked like several years ago, at a beach vacation, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. That detail confused me more than almost anything else about the discovery. If this was a phone meant for an affair, why would the lock screen feature a photo of us together, happy from years earlier? It didn't fit the story I'd already started constructing in my head on the bathroom floor. I taped the phone back exactly where I'd found it, as carefully as I could manage, and finished the actual plumbing repair on autopilot, my mind entirely elsewhere. I didn't confront Rachel the moment she walked in the door that afternoon. I wanted to think clearly first, the way I generally approach any serious problem, plumbing or otherwise. I brought it up that evening after our daughter was asleep, sitting across from Rachel at our kitchen table. I told her exactly what I'd found and exactly where. Her reaction wasn't what I expected from someone genuinely caught. She didn't go pale or defensive first. She actually looked confused. Then, within seconds, her expression shifted into something closer to dread. Not the dread of being caught in an affair, I'd realize later, but the dread of a secret she'd been protecting for an entirely different reason. She started crying almost immediately, reached for my hands across the table and said, "Nathan, I would never do that to you. I promise you, it's not what you're thinking." I asked her directly what it actually was then, since it clearly wasn't nothing. She hesitated for a long moment before saying, "I can't explain everything right now. Please just trust me a little longer. I'm handling something, and I didn't want to worry you until I understood it myself." I want to be honest about how unsatisfying that answer felt in the moment. Trust me a little longer is not generally a sentence that makes trusting someone easier. I didn't confront her further that week, mostly because I genuinely didn't know what else to say that wouldn't just repeat the same unanswered question. Instead, I paid closer attention, not obsessively, but carefully, the way you naturally do once something has cracked your sense of certainty about your own home. I noticed Rachel taking calls in the garage a few times, voice low, always ending abruptly if I came near. I noticed a folder of printed documents she kept in her car rather than the house, which she'd never done before. I noticed she seemed genuinely stressed in a way that didn't match ordinary daily life stress. Thinner around the eyes, distracted during conversations with our kids in a way that wasn't like her at all. About 10 days after the initial discovery, I found a receipt in her jacket pocket from a private investigator's office. Not for surveillance on me, which had been my worst-case assumption, but for something called asset location services, billed to Rachel's name directly. That detail changed the entire shape of what I thought was happening. I sat Rachel down again that weekend, told her about the receipt, and told her clearly that I needed the actual truth, whatever it was, because the not knowing was doing more damage to us than almost any answer could. What came out finally was this. Rachel's father, who'd passed away 18 months earlier, had left behind a will that split his modest estate between Rachel and her younger brother, Kevin. Several months after the funeral, Rachel had discovered, through a chance comment from a family friend at church, that Kevin had quietly sold a piece of inherited property that was supposed to be split between them, without her knowledge or signature. Using a forged power of attorney document he'd apparently created using an old, expired form. Rachel had signed years earlier for an unrelated matter. Rachel hadn't told me because she was deeply ashamed, both of her own brother's actions and of not immediately catching the forgery when it happened. She'd purchased the second phone specifically to communicate with a private investigator and eventually an attorney, without records appearing on our shared family phone plan, worried that Kevin, who had access to some shared family accounts during their father's illness, might somehow monitor or interfere with her efforts to investigate quietly. The lock screen photo of us together, she explained, crying harder now, was simply the first image she'd had on hand when setting up the burner phone. Something she'd genuinely not thought twice about at the time. "I would never cheat on you, Nathan," she said again, this time with the actual context behind those words. What I was hiding was that my own brother stole from me, and I was too embarrassed and too scared to tell you until I actually had proof. Once everything was actually on the table between us, we worked through the rest of it together rather than separately. The private investigator Rachel had hired confirmed the forged power of attorney conclusively, comparing the signature and notary stamp against legitimate documents from the same period. Rachel's attorney filed a civil suit against Kevin for the value of the improperly sold property, along with a formal complaint regarding the forged document. Kevin, once confronted with the actual evidence rather than vague suspicion, settled relatively quickly rather than risk a criminal forgery investigation being added to the civil matter, reimbursing Rachel for her full share of the property's value plus legal costs over a structured payment plan. The relationship between Rachel and Kevin hasn't recovered, and honestly, I don't think either of them expects it to at this point. Family gatherings on that side have gotten noticeably smaller and more careful since. I think about that afternoon under the sink often, mostly because of how close I came to building an entire false narrative around a genuinely different, though still painful, truth. If I'd confronted Rachel immediately and aggressively, assuming the worst, I don't know if she would have felt safe enough to eventually tell me what was actually happening. What I learned, more than anything, is that "I would never do that to you" can be completely true, and still leave real space underneath it for something else entirely. A different kind of secret, a different kind of protection, not of an affair, but of a family wound she wasn't ready to expose until she had solid ground to stand on. 17 years in, I'd like to think our marriage survived that discovery, not because nothing was actually wrong, but because we were both, eventually, willing to sit with an uncomfortable question long enough to find the real answer underneath it. If this story got to you, the next one is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.